The Edmonton Oilers pulled off a remarkable comeback in Game 1, ultimately prevailing in overtime. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, what we learned and what it means going forward into Game number 2.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition ahead of Game number 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my second Stanley Cup Finals run as host of Locked On Oilers. Well, thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances today with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year subscription. So on today's very busy Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to walk through some of the keys through Game 1 that, upon reflecting, taking some notes, rewatching some highlights, reading a few columns, listening to a few podcasts, some big takeaways that I think are worth discussing a little bit bigger. So to start things out, we're going to address the Oilers' transition defense, going from defense to offense, what worked well for them in Game number 1 strategically. In our second segment, we're going to pivot to talking about the Oilers' forecheck, why it made the Panthers' defense trying to go from defense to offense such a struggle. And then we'll tie a bow on it with some bigger picture, overarching questions and themes going into Game number 2. So to start things out, and the everydayers have heard me bring this up for almost a week and a half now, it really did feel like a lot of the moves the Oilers made from about August on of last summer were oriented around the idea of what happens if we play Florida again, and how can we be better prepared for that series against the Panthers, a hypothetical series against the Panthers. And the two biggest and defining moves, and the reasons I frankly believe that to be the case, were the signings of John Klingberg and the trade acquisition of Jake Walman. Now, in a vacuum, the Klingberg signing was a dart throw. This is a player who had 12 NHL games to his name in the previous 12 months, coming off of double hip resurfacing surgery. Frankly, the type of injury that would make some players consider retirement before trying to pursue hockey again, how debilitating it is. You got to remember, coming off of that type of surgery, you have to learn how to walk again. And then once you learn how to walk again, you have to learn how to skate again. And then once you learn how to skate again, you have to learn how to get your body conditioned to play NHL hockey again. And John Klingberg made that undertaking in 12 and a half, 15 months, and he deserves a lot of credit. And I'll start with Klingberg, and we'll pivot to Walman, and we'll talk about the defense at large as the segment progresses. But think about the John Klingberg we saw back in February and early March, the first taste of hockey he'd had since the fall of 2023. He looked slow. He looked immobile. He frankly looked like a guy who hadn't played hockey in almost a year and a half. And it's so important to remember, especially when it comes to defensemen, so much of that position is oriented around positioning and instincts. And frankly, hockey at large is the most instinctual sport, I would say, where structure takes a bit of a backseat to the decision-making guys make when the lights are actually on them. And Klingberg last night, and Walman for that matter, and the Oilers defense at large did a really nice job of executing a coherent vision. And something we talked about incessantly in the lead up to Game 1 and the series at large is, how do you withstand Florida's forecheck? We know the Panthers are one of, if not the single most aggressive forechecking teams in the entire NHL. We know that first forward into the zone is going to dive bomb the puck carrier with as much tenacity and ferocity as any player in the entire NHL. And it's what makes Florida so effective is that they have guys as talented as Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Reinhart who play with that intensity. You have ratty pains in the butt like Sam Bennett. You have all-world top-class players like Sasha Barkov, all committed to playing in a singular way. And the Oilers, to their credit, did a masterful job of executing what I would like to call the beat. So when you have your defenders, and it speaks to the quality of players that the Oilers have on their back end, because a lot of these decisions the Oilers made in game last night, and when I say decisions, I mean the players, a lot of those decisions are players on an island. They are holding the puck an extra beat or two longer than they might actually want to entice that over-aggressive Florida checker to make a move. Because as soon as that forechecker comes in, if you make the play you're supposed to, you're going to have an open player. Because remember, think about it mathematically. If you have a forechecker coming at you at full speed, that is making it a 4-on-4. But because that player in front of you is coming at you from one direction, you have more direct reads. And the Oilers last night, to their credit, were very prone. I shouldn't say prone. They were very conscious about making that first pass where it needed to go. And in most cases, that was a simple D-to-D pass. The defenseman who recovers the loose puck turns up ice, invites that Florida forechecker to come towards them. And then if they're on the left, puck goes right. If they're on the right, puck goes left. And that takes the forechecker and the guy who just moved the puck out of the play. That makes it a 4-on-4. And like we talk about all the time when it comes to hockey, we want to make guys make decisions. And the more ice there is available and the fewer players there are, the more opportunities there are. The second part of this, and something I found interesting in respect to the Oilers last night, when the Florida forecheck was really going through that middle part of the game, I would say from about the start of the second period through about the 15-minute mark of the third period, the Oilers could not break out cleanly. The Panthers were just on them. So the Oilers, their recourse was the long flip. And I talked about it a little bit on yesterday's show, so if you're an everydayer, I apologize for repeating myself, but the long flip out, I don't like conceptually, because you just did the work to go and get the puck. You won the puck. The entire objective of the game is to have the puck. You can't score if you don't have the puck. And to turn possession, guaranteed possession, into what is at best a 50-50 play in the long flip, the alley-oop, the high pass, whatever word you want to use to describe it, it's not the safest play. It is conceding, potentially losing control of the puck and having to go right back to defense. But because the Panthers were forechecking so aggressively, because they were clogging the neutral zone so effectively, it made it where the Oilers needed to relieve that pressure by any means necessary. And to their credit, the long flip worked in doses, and it gave them enough time to get their feet under them, make changes, and go from there. And this is not the easiest way to play. You know, the Panthers, in contrast, and we'll talk more about that in the second segment because we're going to highlight the Oilers forecheck, which was frankly out of this world in game one. But the Panthers don't want their defenders playing on islands like this because they don't have the individual mobility or the individual puck skills. In contrast, 1 through 6, all 6 of the Oilers defensemen are at least average skaters. And in the case of some of them, they're borderline elite skaters. Someone like a Jake Walman is one of the best skating defensemen in the entire NHL. And I know Walman's skill set generally skews towards offense, but his ability to get where he needs to make plays happen is really innate and something really special. And it's made him an invaluable addition to this team. And the one last point I want to get in before we take our first break on this edition of Locked On Oilers, when we talk about the defense and the year-over-year improvement, it was my single biggest decision, and I shouldn't say decision. It was the single biggest factor as to why I feel actively confident as opposed to cautiously optimistic versus last year. It was hard to feel good about the Darnell Nurse-Cody Ceci pair. Did the John Klingberg and Jake Walman pair have a few adventurous plays last night? Yeah, of course. They also had 60% of the expected goal share. That'll play. You generate 60% of the expected goals as the third defensive pair. You're going to give your team a chance to win most nights. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, I'm going to tell you why the Oilers forecheck was so effective last night, why it's actively designed to make Florida in particular uncomfortable, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around. Coming up next. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's so easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much money I was spending on food. Whether it was takeout or snacks or coffee, I was spending too much money. And now with Monarch, I plan my meals out ahead of time. Meal prep is tiresome, but saving money is key. Now I save more. And what makes Monarch useful? It has so many ways to help your financial health. You can track shared personal accounts, set goals, and you can stay on the same page as your partner or significant other. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of game number 2 of the Stanley Cup Final. Now, programming note, I will be out to watch game number 2. There is a good chance the episode for game 2 does not come until late on Saturday night into Sunday when I do ultimately get home. We'll have the normal episode for you on Monday as well. But during the Stanley Cup Final, gotta have episodes as they come, as doable. So, moving along in our conversation, something I felt the Oilers did a tremendous job of, as I click over to my notes here, they made Florida actively uncomfortable. And I talked about it pretty in-depth in the second segment of Locked On NHL yesterday with Hunter Hodes. And we were both really, frankly, astonished to see Florida look that uncomfortable. It is very rare to see the Florida Panthers in any capacity look out of sorts, but it is important to remember what makes Florida successful. Number one, it's their ability to go from defense to offense quickly, and their forwards are an active part of that. They play some of the best team defense, if not the best team defense in the entire NHL. When you have a forward group that is that committed to playing 200-foot hockey, it opens up so many doors. Part of that is forwards winning their puck battle and immediately going from defense to offense. Now, the Oilers part of this, in making those Panthers defenders or just players at large be more active, have to make individual decisions. Like we said before in the first segment, the Oilers want their defensemen on islands because they trust them, because they have the puck skills and the mobility. The Panthers defense is not bad by any stretch. Forsling, Ekblad, Seth Jones is a very respectable, one of the better 1-2-3 punches in the entire NHL. Niko Mikkola is having a tremendous playoffs after largely being a third pair defenseman for much of his NHL career. And then you get to Kulikov and Nate Schmidt. It's really impressive the way the Panthers, and we talked about this with Armando Velez ahead of the series, how the Panthers have continued to rotate guys in on that bottom pair. And frankly, you think about Seth Jones and Mikkola. Mikkola was there last year. Seth Jones, of course, a deadline addition. And how seamless it all is. Some of that is just they play very low-risk hockey. You get the puck, you move it. Generally, you're going to have a player ready to receive that pass pretty close to you. Florida is very happy to rim the puck out, play it off the glass, live to fight for the next play. They are very happy to have their forwards actively regroup, build up a head of steam, and in Sam Bennett's case in particular, who is their best puck-carrying forward, regroup and build up a head of steam and go. And now, talking about the Oilers part of this and what impressed me so much, you think about the games that Kasperi, Kapanen, Vasily Podkolzin, and Evander Kane played last night. Those guys all played like they had rockets up their butt. Those dudes were moving last night. There was intent, there was direction, and none of it was good if you were a Florida Panther. There was a conscientious effort to finish your hit, to make that Florida player, even if the puck had already been moved and you could still finish your check without it being interference. Even if that was the case, you had an obligation to throw that thumping hit. And Kasperi, Kapanen, and Vasily Podkolzin in particular, not guys who play huge roles on this team in terms of minutes, not guys you're going to see on a power play, but they gave the Oilers very timely contributions. And I said this on yesterday's show. I said it on Locked On NHL, and I'll say it again now. Non-zero chance that was a deciding factor in Thomas Nosek taking that delay of game penalty in overtime. When you have been getting thumped over and over and over again, and Podkolzin was bearing down on him as he went to move that puck. He had an extra second, but the Panthers, both by design, they want to move that puck quickly and play it off the glass or rim it up the boards. And having a forechecker who's been throwing crazy hits all night bearing down on him, you had a perfect storm of environmental factors that lead to that. And a lot of that stuff does not show up in the box score. I wish the NHL had more detailed stat tracking. I wish we could see which hits lead to a change in possession versus which hits are just hits, because that shows value. Podkolzin had an assist last night. He contributed on the Arvidsson goal. But you think about it in the abstract. Not every hit, not every faceoff, not every pass, they all don't have the same value. The hits that guys like Podkolzin, Kapanen, and Kane were throwing last night, those were hits that had value because over the course of the game, they accrued weight. It made the Panthers a little jumpy. It led to a million icings, what it felt like between the third period and overtime. And to be fair, yes, the Oilers iced the puck a ton as well in the overtime period and towards the end of regulation. But man, when you have your forecheck going to the degree the Oilers were last night, I should say Wednesday night, but when you have your forecheck going to that degree, you are putting yourself in a position for good things to happen. We talk about it ad nauseum here at Locked On Oilers. If you make the other team make plays over and over and over again, you are increasing the variability. You are increasing the probability that anyone might make a mistake. And those are your opportunities. And in a Stanley Cup Final against a team as good as Florida, there are not going to be a lot of mistakes. Frankly, it felt like Florida played a pretty good game last night, and there are plenty of worlds where they go on to win that game pretty easily, 3-1, 4-2, maybe even 3-2. And by virtue of the Oilers working and working and working, they were able to chip away at that 3-1 lead. And yeah, to pull off a comeback like that, you need some things to break your way. Is the Victor Arvidsson goal something Bobrovsky probably has most of the time? Yeah, absolutely. Does the cluster of players at the net front usually break up the McDavid pass that gets through to Ekholm? Yeah, most of the time they do. But on a night like that, where everything is going your way, you start to get bounces. You know, we talk about it all the time. You can make your own luck if you play well enough. We are going to take our second and final break going into the final segment of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And coming up next, I'm going to tell you what my big talking points and ideas going into game number 2 for both teams are. So be sure to stick around. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday pre-Game 2 edition of Locked On Oilers. And let me tell you, that's as good a hockey game as I can recall in recent memory. Those are clearly, far and away, the two best teams in the entire NHL. I don't feel it's particularly close, especially in the East. You know, in the West, maybe the Dallas series breaks a different way. Maybe if Colorado beats Dallas, maybe Colorado, whatever. That was as remarkable a game where both teams had sustained runs of quality pressure. And I make this comparison from time to time, and it's not a direct one-to-one because soccer has a very different feel. But that's generally how really high-level soccer is played, especially at the club level, where one team is going to have a sustained period of ball control. They're probably even going to score. And then the other team is going to have a sustained period of ball control. And they'll score. And it goes back and forth. And it seesaws. And then as the game gets more and more chaotic, things start to break down, more opportunities manifest. You think about how that middle period of the game went where Florida was largely in control of the play. A lot of work from Sam Bennett and Carter Verhaeghe to really make the Oilers uncomfortable, set face-off plays. And I talked about it quite a bit on yesterday's show, something I rarely talk about, face-offs, but the Panthers were dominant on the dots, especially in the offensive zone, which is not where you want to be when you're playing a team that has 9 quality forwards the way the Panthers do. Hell, even say 11, 12. Every single person in that Florida lineup is dangerous to some degree, and it creates a real struggle when you're a Chris Knobloch of, well, if I get McDavid out there against the Tkachuk line to try and make the Tkachuk line play defense as opposed to letting them create, and then Florida responds with Barkov against Draisaitl, and there are so many different considerations to try and monitor and keep track of, it becomes a real challenge. But talking about game number 2, number 1, I think Florida is going to have a more concerted effort to break the puck out cleaner and not be as concerned with the rim out or the glass out, because they're going to understand to mitigate that Oilers forecheck, you're going to kind of have to take what the Oilers did to you. You're going to have to ask your defensemen to play a little bit more on an island. They're going to have to make those decisions a little bit better. They're going to have to skate the puck out of danger, which is not something the Panthers in particular want their defensemen to do because they don't have the mobility of what the Oilers group does. I think you're going to see a more concerted effort on the Panthers' part to really try and thump the Oilers D. And there's some argument to be made that, hey, maybe if you're Florida, you want to focus a little bit more on controlling the puck, on carrying the puck into the offensive zone, and really trying to find a way, per se, to put the Oilers on their heels for more sustained periods of time. And I know McDavid gets mad whenever people backhandedly compliment the Oilers defense, and I do think that's a fair critique because of how effective this defense is. You think about some of the games they've played, they went 25, 30 minutes in game 1, giving up 5 shots on goal, outshooting Florida 21-5. You think about some of those third periods against Dallas and Vegas, 2 shots on goal, 3 shots on goal against desperate teams, down big in series. And the Oilers, to their credit, have continuously made the right plays in the defensive zone. They have broken the puck out relatively easily. They have resorted to the long flip when it's necessary, and their star players have been able to fill in the gaps. Do I think Florida will adjust? Of course. That creates the natural back and forth, and it's what makes a best of 7 between two teams this good so compelling from a strategy standpoint. Because if you're the Oilers, you're probably going to keep riding Henrique against the Tkachuk line, gritting your teeth and hoping your best defensive group can hold out. You're going to try and get McDavid out there against Tkachuk and force Tkachuk to play a little bit more defense. You're going to try your best to avoid Barkov with Draisaitl and McDavid when you can. And I know chasing the game, you're not going to be as picky as far as O-zone starts, D-zone starts, and using last change to your full advantage. I know the Oilers, when they are chasing a game, and frankly, I try not to double think or double guess, I should say, what the coach does as far as his matchups, because there is a vision. And I think what the Oilers did with Henrique in particular, as far as offensive zone, defensive zone starts, I think it makes sense. I think when you understand what makes the Panthers dangerous, you don't want to be chasing the matchup as opposed to not playing your game. And it's so imperative that the Oilers stick to their guns and get to what makes them effective. I think the Panthers will have more than enough to give the Oilers, where I expect the Oilers to need a better game than they had in game 1. And don't get me wrong, the Oilers played a really good game in game 1. I think the Panthers played one too. It was one of those split, minuscule difference games where one bounce going differently swings a game. And you give the Oilers credit for bouncing back from being in a 3-1 hole, from pulling it out, winning the game. It's only one game. I said it quite a bit on yesterday's show. One game does not define a series. One game's takeaways might not necessarily impact the next game, but take your breaths, breathe. Stuart Skinner's playing good hockey. The Oilers are rolling 3 pairs and 4 lines with relative fluidity. The Oilers have 2 lunatics in Kasperi, Kapanen, and Vasily Podkolzin hitting everything that moves. Evander Kane is due for a goal. Corey Perry probably not going to take 2 penalties in a first period again. The Oilers have room to play better than they did in game number 1. And if you're an Oilers fan, that's what you want to hear, because the goal as your playoffs go along, game by game, is to keep getting better, because your opponent is going to get better. They are going to adjust. They are going to tweak. And then it becomes incumbent upon you to adjust to the adjustments. And we create that natural back and forth of rock, paper, scissors. And what that does to a series strategically makes for the most riveting and the most compelling of television and, frankly, of culture. And I'll wrap up on this note. I always have people ask me, how do I care about sports this much? Why do I care about sports this much? And I always look at them a little silly and say, why wouldn't I? Sports are the rawest expression of the emotions of the human condition. You can experience every single emotion possible during the course of a 60-minute NHL game. Hell, you can experience every single emotion within a single period of an NHL game, and you ride the highs and you ride the lows in the hopes that one day the hockey gods may smile upon you and grant your team the grace to be in a Stanley Cup Final. And then, between the lines, there ain't an almighty. It is best man wins. After one game, the Oilers looked better. The Panthers will be coming for them tonight, and don't be surprised if the Panthers manage to eke this out on road ice. The Oilers can absolutely hold serve and defend home ice, but it's going to take even better than what was already a superb Game 1 effort. That'll do it for today's Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. I want to thank everyone that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we get out of here, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Leave the show a 5-star review if you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. Like the video, leave me a comment. What were your big takeaways from Game 1? What are you looking for in Game number 2? Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night for more coverage of the Stanley Cup Final.